Hello and welcome to our special edition of Beyond Startups podcast. As part of Innovation Week 2025, we will be here today with Douglas, the founder of Kingsbarns Distillery. Douglas, if you could introduce yourself.
I was born here in St Andrews. My dad's side were all farmers, my mum's side were all fishermen. I love golf, so I became a golf caddy before creating this place.
Could you tell me a bit more about your experience of being a golf caddy? Was that your initial career?
No, it wasn't really planned. I went to Abertay Dundee University, graduating in 2001 in business studies. But instead of getting a real job, in inverted commas, like my mum wanted me to, I bought a round the world air ticket and went travelling for 6 months. Then I started caddying at Kingsbarns golf course, the course within view of the distillery here. And I spent my 20s up until 2008 on this cycle of 8 months caddying here at Kingsbarns, and then 4 months backpacking and travelling the world. Caddies are big influencers in what their golfers do, and so quite often my clients would ask me if they could visit a whiskey distillery. And at that time, there was actually no whiskey distillery in Fife with a visitor centre. So I always thought, one day someone is going to create a whiskey distillery with a visitor centre in Fife. But I didn't think that person could be me because I didn't know much about whiskey. I didn't really have any business experience. I didn't have any money. But that all changed when I was backpacking around Tasmania, and I met up with one of my old caddy friends, a guy called Greg Ramsey, who was project managing a small startup distillery there called the Nant Distillery. And this was an old water mill, like a beautiful old barn. And as soon as I walked up to that barn, it reminded me a lot of this old farmsteading, because believe it or not, in the 1980s, when I was a kid, this place was a petting zoo, a farm shop, and a cafe. So I had memories of it as a visitor attraction. But then it went out of business, and so for 20 years it lay derelict. And I would drive past this place every day and think one day someone's going to take that and turn it really into residential. Most places, farmsteadings are converted into residential. But anyway, as soon as I saw this small startup distillery in Tasmania, it immediately reminded me of not just this farmsteading, but a few of the other farmsteadings in the area. And so he, along with a guy called Bill Lark, really did encourage me to believe that I could come back and do something similar to what they'd done, because I didn't really know anyone in Scotland in the whiskey industry. So finally I'd met someone like on the other side of the world, a bit crazy. So I came back here, I wrote to some of the whiskey distilleries who inspired me, and that was a distillery on Islay called Kilchoman. So I went over there and met Anthony Wills, also Mark Rainey from Bruichladdich, across to Arran. And here in Fife, there still is a whiskey distillery with no visitor centre. So no visitors are allowed. It's a private farm distillery, the other side of Cooper, called Daft Mill, run by a chap called Francis Cuthbert. So he was kind enough to show me around as well. My uncle and my cousin were structural and civil engineers. So I got them signed up onto my team, and then we did some feasibility studies on various sites in and around St Andrews. But to be honest, this place was always the one that I loved the most. So we ended up choosing this site, and then I formed the company, incorporated the company, the business, the Kingsbarns Company of Distillers Limited in May 2009. So that was sort of the start date when officially the project got going. We couldn't buy this site, and we're on an estate, the Cambo estate, and an old aristocratic family, the Erskine family, own all the land and the building. So they weren't willing to sell, but they were willing to do a verbal agreement on a lease. And then it was how we're going to go about raising the money, because I didn't have any money, and my uncle and cousin didn't have any money, and the chap down in Tasmania didn't want to put any money into it, and banks weren't interested. Wrote a business plan like all startup people should, and an investment document, giving away shares for phase one of the project, which was to raise approximately £100,000 to do all the preparation work, which is basically to get planning permission, which is a hugely costly exercise for a change of use from a building into a whisky distillery. Threw a big party next door at the Campbell House, and I would actually pitch to my golfers that I would caddy for. I needed to be quite careful, I needed to do it subtly, because I'm sure I would have been sacked if I'd have been in every one of my golfers' faces straight away. So if someone showed an interest or asked about me, I would tell them what I was doing. So I actually managed to do phase one fairly easily by the end of 2009. So I had that money to pay the architects, the engineers, also the lawyer. There were huge lawyers' fees involved in gaining the 99-year lease from the Campbell estate. And then the next phase, once planning permission was done, then that was when we were going to go and raise out the big body of money, which was millions. So that planning permission eventually came through, and then I launched the phase two, round two offer document, which was to raise the full amount of money, which at that time was around £2 million. So, you know, raising that small amount, 100,000, was comparatively easy, because when you ask people for 4 or 8 grand, richer people, you know, they're prepared to take a punt. But then that second phase, when suddenly it's a minimum of 50,000 investment, and you're asking for those bigger sums, you know, it's a lot tougher, because the problem about starting a whiskey distillery is not like starting another business where, you know, you start a business, you get a product and you can sell it straight away. With whiskey, the spirit goes into a barrel, and then by law you have to wait 3 years till you can legally call it whiskey. But really, if you look at the main flagship whiskies out there, it's usually a 10-year-old. So you really don't sell it in volume and start really making a profit until year 10 onwards. And that really puts most investors off. If you're trying to raise money and you're pitching to venture capitalists or investors or anyone really, they typically want their money back in 3 to 5 years with a bit of a profit. And so I really struggled the next year or two, really struggled in terms of raising the money, did lots of pitches and got lots of rejections over those 2 years. Also was applying for the big government grants. It was called the SRDP, and it was so close to getting this £500,000 grant, and then it just slipped through our fingers, and so some of those initial investors lost confidence after that grant fell through, regrouped, and up to that point I hadn't tried to raise the money from the whiskey industry. I tried to do it from, you know, non-whiskey people. The only people who really are going to fund this are people who know about whiskey in the industry. So there basically are, in the whiskey industry, there's whiskey distilleries and there's independent bottlers. And the independent bottlers are guys who don't own a distillery, but they buy whiskey from all different distilleries and then they brand it. So Weems Malts was one of those independent bottlers, and there was a few others as well. So rewrote the business plan, angled at these independent bottlers, and immediately had some interest from them. So over a year period, we were in negotiations with Weems, and the turning point really came in September 2012, when finally all the hard work applying for all these government grants came through, and we were awarded a £670,000 grant, food processing, marketing and cooperation scheme grant from the Scottish Government via the EU. So as soon as that grant came through, like, Weems were just even more keen to come on board. But they weren't willing to come on board unless they had the whole business, so I had a difficult decision to make. So I decided to sell 100% my company to the Weems family and become an employee. All my foundation investors and myself were bought out, so they bought the company outright, and this building and the lease and the grant. So one of the reasons why I chose Weems in the eventuality was they really were like the perfect guys to take the project over, and they were actually so generous. They offered to keep me on board. They obviously saw some value in me, so they kept me on board as founder and gave me the job that I kind of wanted, which was as a visitor centre manager. So I helped set up the visitor centre. Construction started, and it was an 18-month construction period to build it, and then the visitor centre and distillery opened, and then that was on St Andrew's Day 2014.
Scotland's newest whisky distillery has opened in Fife. £3.5 million has been spent transforming an 18th century farmsteading into a tourist attraction, Craig Miller reports.
The dream of one-time golf caddy Douglas Clement had started off like this, but now his vision has turned into reality with the conversion of an old farmsteading into Scotland's latest whisky distillery. Doug had set out to find business backers to create the Kingsbarns Distillery to capitalise on the golf and whisky tourism markets. And his dream was realised by the Weems family, who have ancestral links with Fife and were already an independent whisky bottler. They've invested over £3 million in the project, which has been aided by nearly £700,000 of European money.
When you put 6 years of blood, sweat and tears into a project, to see all your dreams realised is quite emotional, but it is a very proud moment for me to be able to create a little bit of history here, not just for Kingsbarns, but for Fife, the Weems family and the Scotch whisky industry.
The whisky stills arrived only a few weeks ago, but the transformation of the building, even in that short period of time, has been remarkable. The immediate plan is to produce 140,000 litres a year of new make spirit, which will mature into whisky, with single cask editions being released over 3 to 5 years.
I really loved working here as a visitor centre manager between 2014 and 17, and then around the 10-year mark, I felt that I'd done everything I could, and I really needed to move on to whatever I'd do next. So I left the business in 2017, but I left on good terms, and I still come back with clients and do special VIP tours in the evenings. It still means the world to me, and it means the world to me that you're all here. It really makes all that blood, sweat and tears for those 9 years creating the place worthwhile.
And I found it quite interesting with you talking about knowing the right time to step away. I think I've heard that from a lot of other founders, how sometimes you will fall in love with what you create and you can become a bit overprotective and so onwards. And I was kind of wondering, was there a situation that made you realize that? Because it is a hard realization to come to, and not everyone has the courage to come to it. Was there something that pushed you to it?
If I'd have been clever enough, and if I'd have had my money in the beginning, and if I was, if I still owned the business, or if I'd have had some substantial shareholding, I may well have stayed. But the reality was, I was just really doing a manager's job. For me, the really exciting, fantastic part was that creation part. Having the idea, raising the money, seeing it built, and then those first 2 years working there was really special. I really wasn't a shareholder anymore. I was founder. So although I felt it was mine, it wasn't actually mine. And while that didn't bother me in the beginning, I think perhaps I started to think, right, maybe I should do this again. So I was thinking back then, one of the reasons I did leave was because I thought I could set up another distillery.
Having achieved my goal of turning my Kingsbarns Distillery vision into reality, I've now moved on to my next distillery venture, which will be located here in this derelict farmsteading.
So after leaving here, I haven't really told too many people about this because I wanted to try and do it without publicity. But I did spend a few years trying to set up another distillery, which didn't quite happen. COVID sort of put a halt to that particular project. So it was a combination of having that that burning desire inside to do it all again, and trying to learn from what I did here and the mistakes I did here, to try and do it all again, set something else up. Combination of that and the fact that I was, although I was the founder, I wasn't, the owner anymore.
Yeah.
So it felt like my baby, but in a practical sense, it really wasn't mine anymore. And I thought maybe it might be better to move on and let the story maybe move away from me to the owners, the Weems family, and it's their place now. So
I definitely see that. Like, ownership of ideas is a lot of the reason I hear founders go into entrepreneurship in the first place, because people say they want to own what they create. So I feel like that was definitely a very challenging experience.
Well, you've got to thank your mother, because really without her, this place would not exist, obviously, because I wouldn't have been created. But also, when I had the idea for the project, I moved back home because I wanted to put all the money into the project. So I never would have been able to afford to put all my savings and all my caddy money into it, because I would have been paying for rent or a mortgage. My cousin and uncle had a structural engineering firm, David and Graham Cochrane in Glasgow. So that was huge for me, but they believed in me and believed in the project and were willing to help. And with their help, we picked the right architects.
Yeah.
Back in Tasmania, we had Greg Ramsey and Bill Lark as well. So that was the initial team. But that team all changed. When Weems took over, there were a range of consultants that were brought on board, both on the visitor centre side and the production side. The architect stayed the same, which was great, Simpson & Brown. The contractor who built it stayed the same. They were one of the main contractors who tendered for the project early on, Colorado Construction. But then on the visitor centre side, the head of marketing with the Weems Group in Edinburgh, Karen Stewart, she worked with me, and we hired a visitor centre designer called Richard Skakel, and so him and the architect worked with the flow of things. And then on the production side, Dr. Jim Swan, Hamish Proctor, Norman Matheson, and Ian Palmer, William Weems, who I sent that email to on that fateful day. It's actually an interesting story. I sent him the email, and he quite often retells the story how he gets lots of this type of proposition, and he saw a distillery opportunity. And normally he told me that he deletes this type of cold calling emails, but he said that he was on a train and he was bored, and so he undeleted the message and he read the email and he thought, this actually sounds quite interesting. So yeah, it's I always enjoy it when he tells that story. Fate. It's fate.
I'm wondering how you went about the marketing then, because I think advertising a whiskey distillery with no whiskey in it just yet could be quite hard. How did you go about that?
A huge advantage of having the name Kingsbarns was Kingsbarns is already known as a high-class luxury brand around the world because of the golf course.
Yeah.
Kingsbarns Golf Links opened in 2000 by two Californians, and very quickly it became one of the best courses in the world. And so very much piggybacking, I think, on the success of the Kingsbarns name through the golf course.
The coastal fringe from St Andrews to Kingsbarns is linked by a string of pristine golf courses.
We're here at Kingsbarns Golf Links, and it's links golf in the classic form. Links golf being golf played on the land between the beach and the fertile land. The wind is absolutely key. One day you could be hitting a 4-iron to a hole, and the next day you could be hitting a pitching wedge.
Like golf, whisky plays an important part in celebrating Scotland's heritage around the world.
Kingsbarns.
You couldn't get two more Scottish things than golf and whisky, and Kingsbarns has got both of these on its doorstep. A whisky distillery is the latest addition to the area, which means that all those thirsty golfers can stop off for a dram or two before heading off to play their next 18 holes.
I've got hundreds of caddy friends, so I was, they were all really supportive, contacting all the golf tour operators. Social media was just sort of taking off, so I guess I set up the channels, doing like press releases. People quite liked, I think, the story that it was a caddy, someone who came from nothing with not much experience in money. It's quite a romantic story, I think, people, and that I joined partnership with Weems, and then a huge advantage of having Weems on board is they already did trade shows, because their Weems Malts Whisky and Darnley's View were in all around the world in different countries. Almost every week there is a whisky festival. Part of the reason for having a visitor centre is, for people to come, and if they really enjoy it, I mean, if you can get them, hooked, then they will become word of mouth ambassadors. So in terms of marketing and selling your product that's, not got an age on it, you really have to focus on, your core ingredients and what makes it special, your unique selling point, and those are the quality of the barrels.
Welcome to Kingsbarns Distillery's Ducat, in which lies the first cask of Kingsbarns Spirit, which was filled exactly 10 years ago today by Peter Holroyd, the distillery manager, and his assistant Andy Coleman. It's a first fill American bourbon barrel from Heaven Hill in Kentucky, and Peter was kind enough to draw some of the spirit from the cask for me to taste on this historic day.
The fact that the water comes from directly beneath us.
This area is a particularly good place to make whisky because you have a very good source of water, and that water is stored in these sandstones that we see here, that are rocks that are carboniferous in age. They're 330 million years old. Sandstone acts a bit like a sponge. The water is held in the little pore spaces around the grains. The water that the distillery will be using fell as rain on the land well over 60 years ago, and then trickled through the soil and through the rocks and interacted with the rocks, picking up the minerals and absorbing the character of those rocks.
The fact that, unlike many distilleries, use local barley comes from Weems. I don't know if you know, but Weems is a place a little further along the Fife coast, and there's a Weems estate and a Weems castle. So all of the barley for Kingsbarns whiskies is growing a few miles along the road there.
Fife barley really is perfect for what we're doing here at Kingsbarns. We source all our barley locally, actually from just a few miles down the coast from here. And the region is perfect for that purpose. You've got well-draining soil, a relatively mild, dry climate. And then at this time of year in autumn, when we're looking to go into harvest, you've got long hours of sunshine, a little bit of breeze to dry the crop before it goes into storage.
My grandfather, my father, and myself and my sons have farmed in this area for 100 years. And that's a long, long time in farming. So I'm very proud of that. Our barley is great for producing Kingsbarns whisky. The reason for that is that it produces excellent malt.
Scottish whisky is quite a simple product in some respects. There's not very many ingredients you can put into it. You've got malting barley, water, in our case drawn from directly below the distillery, yeast, and then of course thyme in oak casks as well. The quality of the barley is reflected in the end product. Not just how many litres of alcohol you can squeeze out of every tonne of malt, but in the flavour as well. So using locally grown barley, it anchors the spirit to this place.
Dream to Dram was the name of the first whisky that came out. That was only 3.5 years old, and it really got great reviews. And that expression, Dream to Dram, was coined by a writer, Jamie Johnsey, to describe my journey from golf caddy to distillery founder. So that was the first whisky. That was discontinued, and it was replaced by the 7-year-old Ducat. A Ducat means dovecot, And as you drove in, you would have seen that central tower. So that's the architectural centerpiece. A doo is a dove, and a cot is like a baby's cot where they live. So in the Ducat, the dovecot, they used to farm the birds for their meat and their eggs. So as you drive around Fife, you'll see lots of these towers and fields. And Fife was actually, or is actually, the Ducat capital of Scotland, with more ducats per square mile than any other region in Scotland. So yeah, that's an appropriate name because it's the architectural centrepiece of the building. Balcomie is basically just down the road, Balcomie Castle, the golf course, and Colton of Weems. But it's been great the last few months because we now have a 10-year-old whiskey, so now it's just like Kingsbarns 10, which is special. And they've just released one called Caddy's Dream, and they put my dog in it. I've got a black Labrador retriever as well called Barkley, celebrating that initial founder creation story of me standing on the golf course with my golfer. I have to say that my dog would not have been there caddying with me. That would just have been chaos. But it looks great if you get a chance to look at the packaging.
There's definitely a very nice way to go around working, because obviously, yes, you have the milestone of the 10-year-old whiskey, but also within names, as you described, I think a customer isn't just buying whiskey, they're buying a part of the story of Kingsbarns, and that is very special.